This is the Simpit. I'm your host, Sean Cole, and today we are here to check out the Simagic TB-RS handbrake. This is their new hydraulic handbrake. It goes for $369, which is a little bit pricey, but you get a whole lot of features, and this definitely should not be confused with the original handbrake by Simagic, the TB1, which is like half of the price and a much more simple handbrake. And we'll talk about the differences between basics and super high-end handbrakes. But for $369, yes, it's expensive, but this is a beautiful looking handbrake. It is all made of metal, and when we start going through some of the features, some of the adjustability, I think you're going to see where some of that money goes. It is a very high performance handbrake. Now, before we even get down to business about talking about this too much, let's talk about a few things. The elephant in the room. I am a terrible drifter. I am a terrible rally car driver. And those are the two disciplines that you're going to really need or find people using a handbrake the most. If you're a road racer, you don't need one. Most of the cars don't even have one. If you're an oval racer, you don't even want this thing near your rig. There's no purpose to have it whatsoever. So this is really set for people who love to drift, people who love to do rally car driving in those situations where you do need a handbrake. So why do you need a handbrake in sim racing or real life racing? Well, traditionally, when you hit the brakes on a car, all four wheels start slowing down equally. You have some brake bias adjustment to get a balance on the car. But sometimes that doesn't offer enough rotation. And when you're trying to do a hairpin corner in like a rally situation, or you're doing some drifting and trying to get the car to go back and forth and do dramatic rear steering, you're only going to do that by locking up the rear wheels individually. So the handbrake is set to only the rear wheels of the car, and it totally transforms the way the car will rotate or pivot, and again, is essential in rally or drifting. So let's talk about this shifter in particular. I really like this shifter a lot. You can see it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous shifter. It is almost all made of metal. Everywhere you would want it to be metal, it is made of metal, specifically aluminum. And there are a few areas where it isn't. Obviously, the elastomers, the hydraulic system, the foam grip handle. But for the most part, it is an all-metal handbrake, which is really nice. It is gorgeous. It's a good-looking shifter. It's not just these extra things like the hydraulic cylinder or the compressions area or even the haptics, because we do have the Haptic Reactors installed as well on this, and we'll talk about that as well. But again, it's a good-looking shifter, and you can see it's really robust and strong, and it sits almost 16 inches tall. So when you look at pictures of people who do drifting or rallying, you'll see that those handbrakes usually are very tall. They sit up almost as high as the steering wheel itself, which isn't the same setup as a conventional car. These are cars designed to use the handbrake, and that's exactly how this is set up. Another feature of the RS handbrake is this can be mounted. The handle itself can be mounted in 4 different positions. So if you want it set a little bit forward, or you even wanted it down in that 90-degree angle like a normal passenger car, you could set it that way. This is the way it came, and this is the way I would use it on my rig because it's the way you see it set up on drift or rally cars. Another thing that makes this a top-notch high-end brake is the hydraulic system. So hydraulics, whether you're talking a brake pedal on your pedals or you're talking about a handbrake, hydraulics are what real cars have. So when you're looking for that realism, the realistic feel, the only way to truly reproduce what you're going to feel in the pedal or in the handbrake of a real car is by using hydraulics. Now, do you have to have hydraulics in sim racing? No, it's just another ability to get realism, and in some cases there are advantages. I think some of that fine moment where you're really playing with the perfect amount of braking, that it actually can be a performance advantage as well. But for the most part, a load cell is going to get the job done just fine in most cases. Hydraulics just, for the most part, add that realism and that a little bit slower retraction. So when you let go, it's not quite so springy, and again, a little bit more realistic. So the hydraulic system adds that realism to this brake, maybe a little bit of precision as well. Another great feature about the RS, and maybe one of the things, I think this might be one of my favorite handbrakes, to be perfectly honest with you, the elastomer setup. This is almost exactly what we saw on the P1000 pedals, where you have this compression chamber. In this case, it holds 9 elastomers, and those will compress. When you pull on the handle, it compresses in here, and that is your real resistance and how much pressure or strength that it takes. Because you get 4 different durometers or density of urethane, you can change the combinations to change not only the pressure, but it can also be the progression. It could be 1, 2, 3 stages of feeling, or I could put all 9 of the hardest ones and it would move very little and it would be very strong. Or in my case, we'll talk about what I did with tuning, but I was able to really dial it in to exactly how much distance I wanted it to move and the amount of pressure it took. And that helped me get better braking, again, as somebody who's really an amateur when it comes to rally or drifting. You also have the solid lockout. So this all works just like the P1000 pedals with the tuning kit. This obviously doesn't compress, it's made of aluminum, and therefore all it's going to do is reduce the amount of travel. So if you want to really shorten up the distance, because it does have a long throw, you could go to all hard bumpers with one of these thrown in. As long as your combination is 9, it's the right amount, but this would make it move that much less. So that tuning is another one of the features that I think just makes this an exceptional handbrake. And at $369, those features that we described, you can see where the money's gone, because when you compare it to like a sub $200 handbrake, it'll usually just be like some springs and one tension perhaps, and that's it, not a lot of adjustability. So with that handle adjustment, with the urethane adjustment, you have a lot of dialing in for something as simple as just a handbrake. Now in the case of this one that we tested, you can see I've been so excited about these ever since they came out with the P1000 pedals, the Haptic Reactors. This is a vibration motor, much like a butt kicker. It is a really strong little motor that goes right on, and then when you get rear wheel lockup, you're going to get a signal from games that support it and let you know that you're getting feedback into that handbrake, letting you know you actually have locked up the rear wheels. So it's a nice add-on, and we'll talk about how it worked out when we get down to driving. Another thing I'll just show you real quick when we're looking at it, you've got 2 different connection ways. You have the CAN, the C-A-N, which is like a phone jack style, and this will go into certain Simagic bases directly, or you have the USB connection directly into the computer, so it will work within or outside of the Simagic ecosystem. When it comes down to mounting this onto your rig, it's pretty easy. You've got 2 different options really. You've got threaded M6 threads, and then you've got straight bolt-through points. So if you're using profile, you could just put a nut down in the profile, put the bolt through that hole, and mount it right to your rig. Or if you have a drilled plate for your handbrake like I did, you can just go right into those threaded bottom screws, and 2 screws later, it's firmly mounted onto the rig, and then we can move into software and then get down to driving and see how it actually performed out on track. So before we can actually drive, we do have to start off by downloading and installing the Simagic software. And we've covered this, and if you're already on a Simagic wheel or on a set of Simagic pedals, you already have the software installed. So you're just going to have to plug the USB in or plug this into the steering wheel, and then you're going to want to calibrate the handbrake, do any firmware updates to the software, make sure that everything is up and running. And we've covered that so many times. And when it comes to the handbrake, it's really basic. If you go to the devices and you look at the handbrake, really all you have is something to verify its position, the ability to calibrate it, and then we can go to the feedback screen and change the frequency or the strength, or test and confirm that we're getting a vibration noise, which we are. So everything's working, and we're ready to get into our favorite sim and see how it actually performs on track. All right, now it's time for the fun stuff. Let's get out on track and see how this Simagic TB-RS handbrake really works. Hydraulic handbrake, I should say. So I fired up iRacing for the purposes of this, but we're going to talk about all the sims because I used it in Rally, I used it in Assetto Corsa for some drifting, just to see how it performed in different circumstances. But here we are in iRacing, and the reason I'm here is because at the Iowa Rallycross, there are 2 or 3 legitimate hairpins per lap. So a good opportunity to use it with some frequency. And again, as I mentioned already, I am not the best rally driver in the world. I don't really know how to work a handbrake as good as the pros do. but it is still an advantage. And on a track like this, when you have 180-degree turns, you need to get some extra rotation on the car to get it all the way around the corner. Otherwise, you're just losing a lot of time by having to slow down tremendously versus take advantage of the tremendous power and setup of these rallycross cars. When I think of a handbrake, you know, obviously you want it to be strong because we're going to be pulling on it with a lot of power. I'm just reaching over there, almost an emergency handbrake. And I am just yanking on that thing. And I'm doing it a lot if you're doing rallycross or rally driving or drifting a lot. And that amount of leverage with a 16-inch arm, that is a lot of leverage on the unit. And you can even see this deck for the shifter is even flexing a little bit. And this is a very strong deck. So it just gives you an idea amount of strength of the unit. We're not hearing any funny popping noises or any kind of weird indication that it wouldn't last or that it's not handling the rigors of this kind of abusive driving, which is what we're doing with it right now for sure. So that is a really good aspect. Now, when it comes to not only the strength in terms of what I'm hearing and that it feels good and rigid, but it really moves nicely in this direction. I'm not getting a lot of side to side. We just crashed again. We're not getting a lot of extra side to side movement. The movement is very restricted in that front and back direction. So when you're using this thing for precision, it is critical that it only moves in the direction that we want. No extra flex in any other direction. And then yet, it's still smooth. Its action is smooth, but you can't call this a lightweight shifter. That is a lot of pressure. And we're gonna talk about the elastomers and how much pressure I have put on this, or the way I've actually tuned it for my type of driving. And I think that is really important when talking about the TB-RS handbrake, the elastomers with the hydraulics. So the hydraulic is set. You can't adjust that pressure at all. But the strength with all those 4 different types of elastomers and that solid piece gives me the ability to not only adjust the strength, but also the linearity, or the amount of buildup in the strength. You can make it progressive. And you can also somewhat restrict the movement. So if you don't want full throw like I have here, then you can actually make it a little bit shorter by using stronger urethanes and that spacer. So now, when I first got in, I noticed that with my lack of delicate touch when it came to handbraking, that I was just pulling. When I showed you how I was just reaching over and yanking on this thing, how for me that was just too much action. It was just giving it too much handbrake, and it was just over rotating the car more than I could even handle. So then I changed out the elastomers and I went to a softer followed by a harder section. So a real good progression of soft, which gave me a bit of movement. You can see a little bit of movement there, and then needing to give it a little extra something to get into that second half of resistance. And that really got it to the point where even with the way I was overdoing the handbrake, I was able to limit the amount and get it dialed in for this rallycross. I mean, I can handbrake like I've been doing it a long time, and like I know what I'm doing in these circumstances, and it's because of that ability to get that pressure just right. It's like tuning me and the handbrake, and then the timing or the pressure required in game. Now with that, when I switched to drifting, it didn't work out nearly as well for me, and that is a combination of probably taking the time to tune it in like I just talked about there, and that it's an even harder discipline when it comes to using the handbrake properly versus the rallycross here that I'm doing, which is just a bunch of 180-degree turns. So with the elastomers and the ability to make it strong, I said this isn't a lightweight handbrake. It is strong, and it is strong not only in its ability to resist me, but in the amount of restriction that I can put in it. So if you want a very stiff handbrake, no problem, just load that thing up. And if you wanted something soft, you're gonna be able to get that full throw with no problem, and then it's actually a lot of distance to work with if you're looking for that kind of precision. And I think that is really where this handbrake shines, that tunability and that strength combined, and then packing it into, quite honestly, a reasonable price. I mean, I'm not gonna call $369 on sale or $389 list price. I'm not gonna call that cheap. It's certainly not cheap, right? but it certainly isn't breaking the bank like some of the super duper expensive handbrakes that we see, especially at the point when you're getting into hydraulics. So again, a good feel, good combination of smoothness with strength and what feels durable at the same time. Now in iRacing, I'm not getting any of the haptics. Just doesn't happen. Just like the gas pedal and the clutch, it just isn't giving feedback to the haptics like it does with the brake pedal. So for the best result on the haptics, I actually did have to drive Assetto Corsa, and I drove the drift because I'm drifting with my handbrake, and in that you do get the handbrake lockup feel. Now, it is weird because, again, when you're not really good at using the handbrake in the drifting manner, it's hard to really recognize those cues. Like, I think about how good I am at recognizing that haptics in my brake pedal when I'm racing. But I just don't seem to have that same touch when it came to the haptics and drifting. Now, with that said, I think the haptics are a great add-on. But when I think of this handbrake and that price point of the $369 or $389 and what a tremendous deal it is, I really mean that. When you add the haptics, you're adding not only the shaker itself, but also the power supply. So you're looking like $80, $89 depending on where you buy it. And at that price, it really raises this to a different level, and it's not so expensive. And I think, again, do you need a $369 handbrake? And it comes down to what kind of driving you do. If you spend all your time rally racing, it's a no-brainer. You want a good handbrake just as much as I want a good hydraulic brake under my foot. If you're a drifter, it's essential to have a high-quality handbrake. And with Simagic, and you think of their sponsorship of Formula Drift, it makes sense that they would have such a great handbrake, and probably getting some great feedback, some real-life Formula Drift guys, which makes sense, and you can kind of tell when you feel, because it definitely feels like it was built to do exactly this, be a drifting, rallycross, rally driving handbrake. Now, if you just dabble in drifting, you just dabble in rallying, some other discipline, Formula One or whatever is your main discipline, well, honestly, this is probably more expensive than you need. So if you're on any kind of a limited budget, you know, you can use a button on your wheel. You could use a paddle shifter if you have the extra paddles on the bottom. You could use a inexpensive handbrake that might only set you back more like $100 or $200. So there are other options. But if you have the budget, this is a really good, I would even say, pro level handbrake, and absolutely one of my favorites and one of the best that I've ever tested. I mean, it's smooth, it's strong, it's realistic, it's high performance, it's tunability, it's a great handbrake. The ability to plug it right into certain Simagic bases is a bonus, and then the ability to just plug it in USB. I mean, so you got that option even, so it's very flexible. So very impressive, very happy, and my pleasure to drive with it and show you everything about it. I think it's a great option if it's within your budget and you love rally racing or drifting or rallycross. It's going to be a really good combination there for you. Well, I think that tells you just about everything that you need to know about the Simagic TB-RS handbrake. But to cover the main points, let's break it down with the good, the not so good, and the bottom line. Starting off with the good, and that being that hydraulic system, that super realistic feel, smooth action, vertical or horizontal handle position, easily adjustable pressure, comes with its own tuning kit, looks awesome, built to last. And now on to the not so good, and I don't have a lot of negative things to say about this handbrake. I mean, the first thing I guess I would say is that it is fairly expensive. I mean, you can get handbrakes for under $100. You can certainly get handbrakes for under $200. We have exceeded the $300 round without even getting to the haptics, but you do get a lot in it for that money. And the only other negative thing that I can think of is I didn't like this foam handle. Now, this is replaceable. It's compatible with a bunch of different handles that you can put on here. anymore. So if you wanted something made of metal, if you wanted something wrapped in leather, you could certainly find and make that replacement. For me, some people might like this foam. It's squishy, it's grippy. My concern is if I hit it with anything sharp that it would be pretty easy to tear it or rip it. And maybe I like something a little firmer than that soft, squishy one. But that's really all I can tell you that I think could be improved on this. It's a really great design. It works so well. And so let's move on to the bottom line and we can wrap this up. I mean, again, this is maybe one of my favorite handbrakes. I use the Ricmotech GT Pro handbrake. It is an incredible handbrake, but it's almost $200 more than this. And it is a little bit more performance. It is made with a Wilwood handbrake assembly, which raises the cost. But bang for buck, I think this gets you a lot of a real good precision, a lot of great tunability, and a super realistic feel. Now, I think back to my career in sim racing, and I have done just about every variation of using a handbrake in sim. So I've used a button on a steering wheel, just that was full lockup the minute you pressed it. I've used the extra paddle shifter if you have the lower paddle shifters as a handbrake. I've used the cheap handbrakes, you know, $100 for just a lever and a spring. I've used the slightly more expensive versions, those $200 variations. And, you know, there's a good reason for every step. And I think it comes down to what kind of driving. Like for me, I'm mainly a road racer. If I had to pick a second discipline, I'd say it's probably oval. And then from there, we move into rallycross and then into rally and drifting. So with that progression, for me personally, the handbrake isn't the most important component. So if I'm on any kind of a budget, then maybe I'm going to be quite content with just a button on my steering wheel. Now, for those people who drift, the handbrake is essential as any other component on our rig. I would equate it to the same as the amount of importance that I think of my brake pedal in a road racing scenario. And in those cases, I don't think that $369 is too much because of how often it's used. Same thing for rally drivers when you're doing those 180-degree hairpin turns. Doing it in style, doing it faster with a handbrake when you know what you're doing, which I don't quite know what I'm doing, is a huge benefit, and it happens often enough that it might be worth that kind of money. So when I think of the value, and I even think of putting the negative side of the cost itself, I think it comes down to application, I think it comes down to driver, and I think it comes down to how often you use the handbrake or what kind of budget that you're on. So with all that said, I really do love this handbrake, and I think at $369 it's great. And that takes us to the haptics. For me, the haptics is completely unnecessary. Number one, only a couple cars in iRacing, which is my main sim, even utilize a handbrake, and they don't output anything for rear lockup. So in iRacing, it does absolutely nothing. Now, when I went and did some drifting in Assetto Corsa, it was really kind of cool. Now, I don't know what I'm doing with the handbrake. I don't know how to drift very well. So it maybe wasn't the best example of usage. However, for those who do it, just like when I was talking about the cost at $369, that extra $89 or $80 on sale for the power supply and the single individual haptic reactor, it is a big expense. It's a big add-on. But again, with the amount of use, you're building a rig around a handbrake and a rally or drift situation, I don't think it's too much, and it's always something that you can just add later if you want. So since it's such an add-on, it's something that I really wouldn't put as a pro or a negative, because really it's if you want it. You can add it on later. You don't have to get it. It doesn't change the price of the actual shifter, and it really doesn't even change the performance that much other than an early warning signal or a secondary signal that you've achieved lockup. So again, I'm very impressed with this. It feels like it's going to last forever. It is super dial in, and when I did that driving, I was really able to get that perfect amount of distance, so even I, an amateur with the handbrake, could get the amount that I wanted without over locking up or under locking up. Really made it a great handbrake for me. So great job by Simagic. Thank you for sending it, and I hope that I've told you everything that you would want to know or answered any questions that you would have about the Simagic TB-RS handbrake. So that's going to do it for this show. Be sure to thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you can find out when our next video comes out, and thank you for watching. This is the Simpit I'm Sean Cole, and I'll see you on the track.